we're back here to Liquid Lunch in the home stretch of the show, and it's really awesome here because we have Jerome Baudry, who is the co-founder and vice president of the Yoruba Cultural Association of Canada. I said it in English.
Yeah.
And the vice president and co-founder of Jerome. I'll let you say it and tell us what it is.
Ifa Orisa is our religious house here in Canada, sort of like our temple.
Okay, and that's a Yoruba language,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
we're going to get into this, right?
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
is West African spirituality.
That's correct.
And we also have Beth Peart Weeks here, who happens to be my cousin, right?
Right?
And who's heavily involved in West African spirituality, right?
True.
And we're going to just explore the whole topic today, and in a very informal, conversational way, and just hopefully all learn something. So where do we start, Jerome? Maybe a little bit about your background, because I know it's very interesting. You actually are originally from France, and there's a whole story there too. But just give us a, get us started on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Hugh. I was born in France. My father was French. My mom was born in Cuba, background French. And my mother was a very interesting person because she was a career diplomat. And when Fidel Castro took power in Cuba, she resigned her post and was asked by UNESCO to do the first truly comprehensive field study of the African belief systems that had been brought over with the slaves during the slave Holocaust in the 1700s, 1800s. And to be able to create a religious map in terms of tracing by the language, by the ritual practice, to trace back what part of Africa it came from, and how did those traditions survive, and how were they practiced still in Cuba. So I was very fortunate growing up, with that sort of culture and background. And years ago, about 7 years ago now, I began to study in preparation to becoming Babalao. And
Which
5
is
years ago,
what
which
is-
is a priest of Ifa. It's
Okay.
the priesthood. Babalao literally translated means father of the secrets.
Okay.
And studied here in Canada with my mentor, my Oluosiwayu, Fernando Cameron Fernandez, and other Babalaos here. And I was initiated just over 5 years ago and have been practicing the religion here in Canada and internationally as well, and trying to work with members of the association like Beth and my godfather Fernando and others at the Tubman Institute at York University to try to bring greater awareness about West African belief systems, especially Ifa Orisa, which is the branch, if you will, or the belief system specifically we practice, but also a little bit of awareness on other sister or related religions like Vodun Fa and religion of Palo and Kisi, which is from the Congo region and Angola.
Okay, and you mentioned the Vodun,
Vodun,
which
yeah.
is where we get the word voodoo from.
Voodoo from,
right?
exactly, yes.
Now, is that more Nigerian, or is that like more Congolese?
Oh, voodoo, the Vodun, which
Yeah.
is the original, the actual practice means vital energy or spiritual energy. And it originates from the area of West Africa, which is today Benin, Togo, Ghana. And it was the religion practiced by the ethnic group or tribe, which is the Fon and the Ewe. And which the Fon at one point formed a kingdom, which was called the Kingdom of Dahomey, where the religion of Vodun Fa was the religion of the king, right? Essentially, it was the state religion.
Is that still a nation, Dahomey?
Dahomey, no, because during colonizations, West Africa was carved up like a Christmas turkey, regardless of ethnic or religious or even tribal boundaries. And so you had, different groupings that sort of got stuck, were forced to live together
Which
in different
explains
areas.
things like the Nigerian Civil War.
Yeah,
and that sort of
exactly.
thing.
Wow.
So,
I could just listen to this and not even ask a question. I think it's so amazing.
yeah.
But I do have a question.
Okay,
If you
go. Ask
Okay, so your mom
Yes.
was commissioned to do this study.
Yes, by
And you're
UNESCO.
saying you grew up in it. So how long was this study?
Well, my mom had done the study for a period of almost 5 years, 5, 6 years. She had recorded most of the things. They had, much like we are doing now, except not for radio purposes. In those days, they were doing tape recordings and all that to record the languages, the language used in the ceremonies, and to do interviews and to gather a little bit of the language and so forth. And those were all given over to the Department of Anthropology, the University of Havana, and working with Don Fernando Ortiz, which was a musicologist and anthropologist, very famous and very well known within the Cuban and religious communities. And when my mom left Cuba, she brought some of her materials with her to France. And at home, we would, my mom would constantly continue to do research, maintain contact with different practitioners, and essentially you grew up with it as a field of study that never goes away.
But she was looking at it. I kind of asked you this before.
Yeah.
But she was looking at it as an academic.
Absolutely.
Right? But was she practicing it, or did she have some
Must
of that
have influenced
in
her
her
in some
family
way.
going way back, or?
One of the interesting things, nobody in her family was really an avid practitioner. In Cuba, if we give a little context, because of slavery, and because of the African slaves maintaining and fighting very hard to maintain their spiritual traditions, after slavery was abolished, the African religions, popularly known as Santeria, in terms of the Yoruba tract, or Regla de Ocha, became very practiced on the island. So although recently Pope Francis visited the island, and reportedly 90 or 80% of the island are Catholics, reality, most of them actually practice Santeria, which is
150%.
150%. and it's because the slavery forced them to, in order to keep their religion alive, to look at syncretic, archetypal similarities between Catholic saints and Yoruba Orisa. And so in order to hide their practice and in order to be able to still maintain their ceremonies, they would use the Catholic names, but with the intention going to their
Interesting.
Yoruba deity or divinity.
That's kind of like
Orisha.
why we celebrate Christmas on December 25th,
Exactly.
even though that's
Exactly.
really
Yeah,
the
it is
ancient
a syn-
Roman,
Absolutely.
It is a
pagan
syncretic
Absolutely.
holiday, right?
Absolutely.
So that's interesting because, I mean, just a little curious question about the ethnic situation in Cuba, because
Yeah.
you have the Africans,
Mhm.
you have the Spanish.
Yep.
I don't know if you have any of the original native
Americans,
people
yeah.
that lived there.
The indigenous
Taino.
population of Cuba was almost completely eradicated by the Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was one of the most horrible genocides. I mean, the Spanish basically wiped out the indigenous population.
So then you primarily
So
you
it's
have
primarily the African. Although they eradicated it, there were still traces left in the belief system, but most of the spirituality was of an African base.
Yeah.
The other major influence in Cuba, religiously, was a French spiritualist or spiritist called Allan Kardec, which basically had created or founded a school of spiritism called Kardecian spirituality, which created an interesting mix between the African spiritual belief systems, the Kardecian or French, and the Catholic, sort of inheritance.
So when would this Kardec have been around? And just trying to get a historical perspective.
We're talking the influence of Allan Kardec would be felt in the late 1800s, 1900s, in Cuba.
And he was living in Cuba.
No, he was in France.
Oh, I see. But
Yeah.
somehow the Cubans.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
in Cuba there was also not very large, but there was definitely a lot of influence of French in Cuba,
Okay.
which is very part of the Cuban history, which is not talked about too much.
So that Kardec spiritualism, was it related to the Catholic Church? Because France was predominantly Catholic as well, or was it
No.
different?
You want?
I was going to say that the Christian systems also have their own occult systems, and I believe it was connected to
So it,
occultism of
there
Catholicism.
was a tie to
Yeah.
the Catholic.
Allan Kardec was actually a gentleman. It wasn't his real name; that was his pen name. And what he would do, he would write children's books. And he adopted the name Alakandek because what he would do is, much like we're doing here, is he would have seances where a medium would be possessed with a spirit or various spirits, and he would record and make notes in terms of what that spirit was saying, and would record the whole process of possession. He was fascinated, Alakandek was fascinated with the question of possession and how the spirit plays through a human host in order to bring about revelations or messages.
Okay, so a quick question then. So in Cuba today, we have this primarily, even the 90% who consider themselves Catholic are still using some of this African
Yes.
tradition.
Absolutely.
And then the other 10%, is there like is there a group that also adheres more overtly to the African
Yes.
and doesn't really pay attention to the Catholic?
Absolutely.
Very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. Yeah.
Is that kind of
Very
the tradition that you're bringing to the table
Ve-
here?
Respectful of the Catholic faith, but more what we're trying to bring out is really a clear understanding of the roots of what Santeria and Regla de Ocha and Ifa was in Cuba, which is really Yoruba Ifa Orisa, which now, thanks to virtue of the internet and a little bit more freedom of travel, has allowed for more exchange of information and more aspects of the faith in terms of language, practice, ritual to come out.
Now, okay, this is great. Probably do this all afternoon. But I want to ask you a question, Beth.
Okay.
Okay? Because even though you're my cousin,
Yeah.
and we've eaten together many times, I don't think what is it that attracts you to this? Because you grew up in Welland, just like me.
Yeah.
You know,
And you're not attracted to it.
I'm not saying that. I'm just
that's it.
asking Beth.
Some of the most spiritually interesting people that I've ever met are from Welland. Spiritually different people that I've met are from Welland. But first of all, it's really hard to say. But from the time I was a small child, I had a real fascination with things African, and particularly with West Africa. I don't entirely understand why it just was.
Mm-hmm.
And through university, I had cultivated a number of friendships with people, particularly from West Africa. And a lot of my interest had to do with cultural things, had to do with art, had to do with music, had to do with the outward expressions of everyday sort of applied art, clothing, design, that kind of thing. And then I moved away and got busy with other things in life, and it seemed to come back and get me.
Yeah, didn't you have some weird experience where you would run into some kind of
I did have a
entity
very
around the
odd,
city?
yeah, I had a very, very strange experience back, this is more than 20 years ago, maybe.
Do you want to just tell that
Thursday?
story
Sure. Because it unsettled me so much that it was like actually one of those kind of traumatic experiences. It's really hard to articulate, but I was driving late at night in Scarborough, of all places, and I was in my then boyfriend, my husband's car, driving over the 401 on McCowan Road. And I could see this man walking towards me on the sidewalk. It was wintertime, and he was bouncing along. He had this very peculiar gait. And that's what drew my attention to him, was that he had this very, very odd way of walking. And before I even got close enough to see his face, the hair on the back of my neck started to prickle, and I had this really sudden panic flight feeling. And as the car passed him and I looked at him, he looked at me and flashed this terrible, it's impossible to really say, but this grin, and he had this face like a dead guy. He had this face that looked like it was the color of cigarette ash in an ashtray, and black sockets for eyes, and this
Oh my
big black
God.
mouth with these big teeth, and my car swerved all over the place, and my heart nearly exploded, and I thought, what the heck was that, and why? And then I just put it so far out of my mind, because I felt like I had just passed something that fell in from some other dimension that was disguised as a human being but wasn't. And flash forward 18 years or so, and I started to remember him. And he started coming out and writing. And in fact, I had seen him twice. I saw him on another bridge in another part of Scarborough on another occasion. And
Same thing walking.
yeah, same thing walking.
Did he smile at you again?
No, he didn't. He didn't respond to me on that time. But I spotted him. I could see. Oh God, there's that guy again, and standing on the arc of this bridge, like moving along.
Wow.
And
I mean, that
he's
alone, what are the
just-
chances,
well,
right?
what are the chances? And so anyway, as it was coming out, I was struggling to understand what this was. And there was a woman that I knew through writing and through the writers groups that I had, who was from New Orleans and had grown up in a Vodou family, and something just said, ask her. Ask her. And she wrote back and she said, well, the first thing she said was, I'm not sure that you're ready to hear this answer, but I'm going to treat you as if you are. And she said, I think that Papa Leba has been trying to get your attention. And Papa Leba is a Vodou spirit, the spirit of the crossroads, a trickster, spirit of communication. And he's very closely related to the Yoruba, Orisa, Eshu. In Cuba, they call Eshu Elegua. And Elegua is, many scholars believe, is actually derived from Leba, Elegba in Yoruba. So essentially the same spirit, just called by different names. And I thought, oh, that was interesting. But it started a little thing ringing in my mind, and I began to poke around and ask questions and look and read and look for pictures. And I, by chance, went to a course where it was a drum making course, and I made this drum, and I said, okay, well, this one was a nashiko, it was a funnel-shaped drum. I'm going to say that I made this for Elewa, I made this for Eleba. And 4 months later, I walked into a drum group that started off as just kind of a fun get-together drum circle, and gradually morphed into a religious practice. And so that's where the door first cracked open on Ifa, on Orisa. That particular group had an initiation process. I went through that. It was outside of the sort of orthodox sphere of Cuban religion. It did have roots in West Africa. It did have a Yoruba tradition, but out of Sierra Leone. So further west, the remnants of both the returned slaves from the New World, as well as the remains of the Yoruba people who were once more widely spread across West Africa in greater numbers until the Middle Passage, until the Holocaust came and removed so many of them. So I went through that. A few years later, I was introduced to a priest diviner, very much like Jerome, who initiated me to Ifa. And that's where I'm at right now. So I say that I have Ikofa, that means I have my, this is called an Ide, Ifa. It allows me to prepare food for Orisha, and it's also a charm against premature death. And it also helps us identify one another as we walk down the street, which happens occasionally.
So, Jean, you have something on your wrist as well,
Yeah.
and it's similar colors. It's the yellow-green, but it's a very different design.
More for differentiation or identification, the thicker ides, the thicker bracelets, identify typically somebody who's initiated as a priest. So that's why the Babalao will typically have everybody. There's a little bit of license in terms of the design or the thickness and all that. There are some basic rules that you follow out of tradition, but it's the purpose or it's not just an adornment or as Beth pointed out, the day represents a treaty between the divinity Ifa Orumila with death, that no true son or daughter of Orumila or Ifa can be prematurely taken by death without Ifa Orumila's permission and blessing. So it was, as Beth pointed out, it's something almost like a protection
Right.
to ground. And often, many people have come to the religion in situations where their life, either from health or other situations or surrounding their life, put them at severe risk. And they receive the hand of Orula for many reasons, but one of them is to receive that protection or that sort of binding to the earth, so they can't be taken away prematurely.
Yeah. They also will appear in mahogany and green
Yeah.
beads, blood red and green beads, all within Ifa. They all mean the same. They just are dictated through different Odu Ifa, the sacred verses of Ifa, but they all serve the same purpose and they mean the same thing. And some people believe that, wrongly, that the green and yellow color is a Cuban thing, and the brown and green, or the dark red and green, are Nigerian or West African, but that's not true. The yellow and green is also used in West Africa and seen in West Africa. It's just a matter of what Odu is being respected, and mine was more a case of practicality than it was of any particular Odu. It was just when I went to be tied, these were the ones that were there was a choice of two, but only one. So I got this particular color combo, and it means exactly the same as brown, because I was initiated in indigenous Ifa tradition from West Africa, but it's the same system.
Okay, so Jean Jerome, I'd like to find out. So, so when you grew up, did you grow up with a religious tradition at all? Just curious. Like, what part?
Absolutely. We respected, in my home, we respected Catholicism, because my father and my father's family, being on the French side, were Catholics. And my mom had part of her family was Catholic, but she believed very much in the Yoruba faith. And there's another aspect or dimension that, much like Beth's story, people that come to Yoruba faith, regardless of what their traditional religion or belief system is by inheritance, some families are Catholic from many generations and so forth. But what Beth's unique story or description points out is that as spiritual beings, as human beings, we have our direct blood ancestry, but we also have an ancestral lineage which permeates and defies color, creed, or country, and can influence us in this life and take us, depending on what our destiny is, to follow more closely the faith.
Which explains how Beth comes to it, even though her...
And yourself too, because you said you had done some DNA testing.
Yeah, I in my
very
many years of study in terms of the spiritual, seeing different aspects of my own spiritual belief, my own affinity for West African, especially Yoruba, and even Fon belief systems. I like to put a little bit of the science to it, and I did the DNA testing, and it definitely shows that from an ancestral standpoint, there is a strong ancestral base from Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, of which my DNA 12% is African.
So I mean,
it's fascinating with the science matches up in this case with a little bit of the belief system, or what you otherwise what people would say, why would being a Western European, why would you practice or become a priest, go so far as to become a priest in a West African religious belief system?
I just find it really interesting that you actually went ahead and did a DNA test. What would even make you do something like that? So you must have had some sort of sense.
I think one of the main reasons is that, like everything in life, one should never be afraid. And this is one of the things I like about the belief system. Why I embrace the Yoruba and Ifa belief system so much, because Ifa is based on truth, on facts. So one of the things that is discouraged in terms of good character, or Iwa, is Iwapele is to never become fanatic to, an idea or belief, but to always ask, to always test,
Yeah.
put it to the test, right? And that is one of the things I like. So Ifa is not one to scorn modernity or technology or knowledge, but to embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find is many things in a corpus of Ifa, which has been, gathered or brought together over thousands of years, is that many of the truths or the allegory and the story, odus of Ifa, talk about many scientific realities or truths that only today, through modern science, are being validated or confirmed.
It's
and so
very
forth.
quantum.
Very, yeah.
It is an extraordinarily quantum philosophy, and one of the things that attracted me to this path was, in part, had to do with the Yoruba concept of ancestors and their belief in reincarnation. And reincarnation can happen most often, I say, within your own bloodline. So that, you give birth to your late parents or grandparents again, and the people are recycled this way. But that there's also that collective ancestry, and I had long before I had come to get this appreciation of Ifa Orisa, is that I had come to this conclusion that there was kind of like this primordial great soup out there in the cosmos, which is the repository of our energy, our life force, because energy can't be transformed, it can't be destroyed. It can be transformed, but it cannot be destroyed or reduced or created. It just is. It exists, and I had already sort of made up my mind that made perfect sense to me, and perhaps could also explain some of how some people really do seem to come back as other people, throughout the world. It's not that common, but you do see some extraordinary cases. And so when I came across this philosophy that held very much the same thing to be absolute truth that I had already worked out in my own mind as being something that worked for me, I thought, okay, let's explore this some more as well. And that was actually one of the huge things about it. And the other thing that I really, really appreciate and was really attracts me to it was that it's a very personal path. Although we all believe in certain overarching and inclusive principles, my path is my path. It's not the same as Jerome's path. It's not the same as yours would be. When you go for this divination where you are told what your life path is and your life story is, that is yours and yours alone, and that is your covenant between you and your maker. And the best thing that you can do is, from that point on, is do what you're told, because it's part of the process of bringing out the best person that you can be.
Do what you're told by whom?
When you go for divination, if Ifa is, in this context, it is the spirit of divination. It is the spirit that speaks through the divination process. When it tells you, you need to do this in order to correct this situation or better your condition, even though it might seem completely illogical at the time, go do it.
So when you're saying is this an actual person or these
Ifa is described, there are many descriptions, and as human beings try to quantify or define this entity. But really, Ifa it's a consciousness that represents the cumulative wisdom of Olodumare being God,
Creator.
the creator.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons when Beth is saying you go to Ifa, there are many cultures and many different levels of priesthood and many different methods of divination. There's divination by possession, there may be divination by cowrie shell, by obi, or coconut, or obi, the obi abata, which is a kola nut.
Yeah.
But in West Africa, when you had a serious decision in terms of the destiny of a person, the destiny of a village, the destiny of a kingdom, you would consult Ifa over all others because it represented the most honest and straight path to the will of God, to the will of Olodumare. Because it was Ifa who, within the cosmology and within the belief system, is one of really the two main witnesses to creation and to the destiny being chosen by every human being when they come to Earth.
So, Jean Jerome, can you give us an example or describe an encounter you've had with Ifa?
The number is, as a Babalao, I practice on a weekly basis. I consult an average of 10 to 15 people a week. Here in Canada, in the United States, internationally. Ifa knows no boundary, no distance. By the name of a person, their date of birth, if I can tell them everything which is going on currently, what's happened previously, what's going to happen in the future, and what they're dealing with.
So you're tuning into their energy.
You're tuning to an energy through the oracle. The oracle, the wisdom, Ifa, the divinity, is when you're consulting, when you do the Moyuba, you're calling on Ifa to tell you what's going on with this person through the consultation.
Okay, so let's create a scenario,
Sure.
if you will. Okay, so let's say Hugh, you're coming to him for consult.
Mhm.
Okay, so when you're calling on an oracle, is it an actual physical thing, or is it just something that comes
Yeah.
through you? Is it a glass of water?
Yeah.
What does this look like?
Yeah, the Ifa system is, when you speak of Ifa as the divinity, when you're consulting directly, you're consulting with the palm nuts, which essentially represents a system.
Palm nuts.
Palm nuts.
So you actually have
You have palm
It
nuts,
is a physical
right?
thing.
Which are a physical thing, which are consecrated. Because when Orumia left the earth, he said, contact to speak with me, to tap into the spirit of Olodumare, you use the palm nuts in a particular fashion, particular system,
Okay.
which is almost a binary system, ones and zeros,
is a
or one
binary
and
It
two.
sounds like it's almost
Yeah.
similar in
Very
to-
similar to the I Ching.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right. I
about.
Ching, 64 hexagram
Mhm,
combinations.
mhm.
Ifa, 256.
Combination.
Right? So
Okay.
Ifa represents
Interesting.
a far
So
broader.
4 times the amount.
Yeah, 4 times the amount, with each Odu Ifa of the two, with having hundreds of stories or a pataki or essay affixed to them, which give you a different aspect of that sign, a different almost incarnation
Yeah.
of that sign on the earth. So you can draw different lessons or different messages
So-
from that system of divination.
So back to Hugh. So he's sitting here asking for a consult. So what does he ask you a question, or do you just?
No, one of the things, and one of the things we like to let the public know.
Blind taste.
When you go before Ifa, or anyone who truly is not doing it for entertainment purposes or for curiosity, but who truly is concentrated, who really has the gift of divination, you don't say anything. The only thing you give them is your name and your date of birth. It is Ifa, or other method, which is the one who's going to tell you why you came, what your situation is, what happened previously, and what will happen
Okay.
or may happen if you don't make some correction.
Okay, so now Hugh is coming to you,
Mhm.
Jean. Okay, so but now you are the filter because
Conduit.
it is the conduit.
Conduit.
Okay, so you have to be pure
Yes.
in order to be able to. Do you throw these nuts? Is
You,
that what
no, no,
happens?
you don't throw. You cast. You take 16 of them in your hand, and you cast by leaving either 2 or 1 in your hand, which is what lets you mark the sign, step by step.
Wow.
Or you use what is known as an opele or equele, which is a divining chain,
Yeah.
right? Which basically allows you to. Every babalao should always have their opele
Don't
with
leave
them.
home without
I just
it.
love the name.
Don't leave home
Babalao.
without
Babalao.
Babalao.
I love that.
That's
name.
where probably Ricky Ricardo got the Babalu
Baba,
thing.
Babalu is after Babalu
Babalu
Aye.
Aye.
Babalu Aye is a divinity of the smallpox, of disease. And that's where, again, a blending from a musicology standpoint,
Yeah.
a blending of African spiritual belief system in the mainstream music and culture of the island.
Unbelievable.
I
But-
love Lucy.
Yeah, but this is definitely a one type of divining chain. The structure is the same, but the elements, depending on the Odu of Ifa or why you're using it, is different. But by casting this,
When
and
you say casting, what does that
basically, throwing it on the mat,
mean? Okay, so
Yeah.
you
yeah,
actually
it will
throw
show
it.
different combinations, right, of
Face
heads
up,
or tails,
face
if you will, on
down.
each
Yeah.
one of them, which gives you the nomenclature by which you mark the sign or write down the sign in this case.
Unbelievable.
Okay, I want to get
Well,
into some
that's
heavy stuff now.
Fascinating.
All
I
right.
know. Yeah. Some heavy
This
stuff.
is
Okay.
heavy.
So, I mean, I'm just going to tell a story. I was in a cab not too long ago and just talking to the driver. And, that's what you do, right? Anyway, he was from West Africa. I forget where, maybe Gabon or somewhere, maybe Nigeria, I can't remember.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. I think it was Gabon. Anyway, I think I was either telling him about death, right, and some of your experiences, or I've had some experiences myself with the Bwiti tradition, and which is in Gabon, and so I mentioned it to him, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, that's from the devil." Right?
Right.
And when you talk about things like possession and spirits,
And voodoo.
so I want to have this conversation
Absolutely.
and voodoo, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's going to be that's
Yeah.
what he said. It's from the devil, and he's from that part of the world, right?
Yeah.
So
Did he say he was
Ca-
from the devil?
no, he was, but he was
Yeah.
from West Africa, and he was saying that this kind of religion is from the devil. So
One of the major misconceptions, and again, this is, a remnant or an ongoing threat, not just in West Africa,
Cultural threat.
but a cultural threat all over the world
Worldwide.
for all indigenous systems and belief systems, is, this religious colonization and looking at the world always through the lens of either a Judeo-Christian or Islamic, optic. In Judeo-Christian and Islamic tradition, they have, and not even originating from them, but they inherited that from Zoroastrianism as one of the earlier, sort of the god and his opposition, or his opposer.
right.
In Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda was the divine, was the entity of God. And Ahriman was the devil or the antagonist of God. Within the West Africa, or in many other indigenous traditions, but within West African Ifa Orisa or Vodunfa, the concept of an absolute evil or an absolute opposer doesn't exist. Many of the things that are attributed to, and you quite often see it in speeches or doctrinization of many of the major religions that we hold dear here in Canada or in the West. The devil made me do it, or this is something of the devil, and so where Ifa and the West
No
African
concept of
traditional put more of that onus on a human being having the choice,
Yeah.
as well, whether it be in material form, in incarnated form, or in spiritual form, to choose between doing a good thing or a bad thing. The concept is not very dissimilar than, again, if we look at a comparison or analogy of the yin and yang. There again, there's the concept of an evil or a Satan, somebody who opposes God or the will of God, or an absolute evil, doesn't really exist. The same within West Africa, within Ifa Orisa, there's the concept of destructive and constructive forces, light and dark, and that both, when exercised at the correct time and in the correct measure, are the essence of life. And so from that standpoint, when unfortunately, many West African, many African, or maybe even indigenous, but have forsaken their ancestral belief systems, either by threat or fear, that's been indoctrinated by many evangelists, whether it be Christian evangelist or Islamic evangelist type, indoctrination, saying, "Oh no, what you practice because you speak to, spirits, or because you divine, that is evil."
Which is, I mean, to the extent that people in West Africa speak either English or French, is
Portuguese.
represents
Portuguese,
the extent to which the European
Yeah.
cultural values have been imposed on the people.
I think it's tragic.
Well,
personally.
it's so interesting because you're Catholic,
Right,
and
right,
they
right.
talk. I was brought up Catholic, and going to see a psychic or even doing anything remotely to do with spiritual stuff that was not within the Catholic religion or controlled by somebody external was considered evil. I remember my mom saying, don't ever do anything like that. Don't even go to a fortune teller. Don't even get your cards read. Don't do anything like that because that's the work of the devil.
You're absolutely right, but we don't have to go too far. That concept of devil or this is the devil. I mean, you had the Spanish Inquisition, you had the witch trials in Salem, you had scientists. If we look at science, challenge saying you're the
Yes,
devil.
yes,
Anything
yes.
which is medicine,
Yes,
you must
yes.
be a witch. You must be practicing something of the
That's-
occult.
that's-
Anything which
Very true.
Christianity, Islam, or in some cases you couldn't understand or define, they would immediately label as something occult, and by being occult or not understood, by not being able to see what it, they would immediately define it as evil.
Yeah.
And which is a mentality which is very foreign to the indigenous belief
Yes,
of people who
yes,
practice
yes,
the
yes.
the art of divination, whether it be through Ifa, whether it be possession, because we are constantly seeing what evil as a quantifier can be, and what good is, and
Well,
they're constant, interplay.
Well, the other thing too that comes to mind is with the whole Catholic, Judeo-Christian, and all that, you are to look to one construct for the answer, not through divination of anything where answers are for each person individually. So it's a control mechanism as well.
Absolutely,
Right.
and it always has been. One of the things, as Beth pointed out, which is what drew me to Ifa more than anything else, is that when you're dealing with real world issues, and as you're looking at yourself as a human being who's looking for their place in the world and how to best use their gifts and to best work on their weaknesses and faults, Ifa has an individualistic, as many spiritual systems has an individualistic approach, because Ifa is conscious that each person has a destiny, and that collectively, right, depending on the community, your family, and what you chose in heaven when you came down, your spirit, your soul in heaven, in the sign of Obedi in Ifa, chooses its destiny on earth. The lessons, much like in Hindu faith and other Buddhist, the concept of reincarnation, right? A spirit, a soul. The Egyptian, the Ba,
Yeah.
right? It comes back, and if it has to learn something in this world, and chooses its parents, its life circumstances, its physical appearance, because everything in order to facilitate a learning in this world.
Yeah.
And it's unique to you.
It's
Right?
unique to you,
It's
to the
not the
individual,
same. It's
yeah.
not a homogenous or
Exactly.
and that's the thing. That's why you need the individual
What
answer.
what I've often said, many really like Christian have, a monologue with the divine.
Yeah.
They pray, they listen to, they go to either mass or at a Catholic church or a church. They go to the synagogue, they go to the mosque, or they go to the temple in general, and they have a monologue. They pray, but seldom what distinguishes West African belief system, Ifa Orisa, Vodunfan, is the fact that it is no longer a monologue, but a dialogue. Because at the moment that Ifa tells you, this is what's going on in your life, this and this and this and this, and you're able to ask or query that wisdom, on important questions, it's no longer happenstance or, I see something has happened in my life, that must be a sign. You're famous in all the movies. I'm looking for a sign, Lord, a
Yes,
sign.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, Ifa, it's not a sign, it's a direct, full drawn out message or dialogue that you have.
Yeah.
So, and that's conversation happens with these
Through the medium of the chain or the palmets.
Now, what about, you mentioned possession, and I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if, we've seen the phenomenon of channeling where, we have these personalities that are actually speaking through people. Does this happen
Ifa recognizes it, but Ifa as such, Babalaos do not practice. In the diaspora and in Cuba and in most regions of Africa, especially under Yoruba, the Yoruba heritage, the Babalao, one of the conditions to becoming a Babalao is that a Babalao cannot mount. In other words, a Babalao must be a person that does not fall under possession. Because when Ifa speaks, it speaks only through the palm nuts and the chain.
see.
It cannot be overruled or interfered with by a spirit.
Yeah.
What would happen? So who, in this tradition then, when people do get possessed,
Yeah.
right, and somebody is occupied by another spirit, like who are those spirits?
It could be an ancestor of that person. It could be an Orisha, another divinity. It could be a spirit which is, varying degrees of enlightenment or awareness.
Or
what they call-
not.
or the
not.
absent light. In Yoruba, they use the term buruku. Buruku means something dark, as opposed to
It's gonna be a lower
an
entity.
egg, a lower entity, a lower vibration. If you look
Yes.
at the aspect of light or brightness or vibration, lower vibration. A person being possessed could be possessed by an entity of lower vibration or higher vibration. That's why in for instance, the practice of Vodun or other practices, when it was a life and death sort of event, or the choosing of the next priest or honunga, or other, they would always go to Ifa. If a practitioner as a Iya Orisa or Baba Orisa, in other words, a person who has crowned Orisha, who can mount or may mount with either spirit or the Orisha, when it's a serious question, they always send it to Ifa.
Ifa, always.
Okay. Well, guys, we don't have a lot of time left.
Just
I
quick,
mean,
quick
this is,
question.
yes, you can,
Quick question.
because
okay.
we're not done yet.
Okay.
So you can ask your question. But
Can
after
any-
she asks your question,
He's taking
I
all
mean,
the time up, so I can't
before
ask the
she asks,
question.
I just want to make sure that is there anything else that you'd really like to talk about before we conclude this interview today? Maybe let her ask her question, and then if there's anything else you want to make sure we talk about, then
Yeah,
let's
absolutely.
talk about it.
Absolutely.
Just a quick question was, can anybody come to see and get the counsel, or do you have to be of this particular belief?
Anyone.
Okay.
Anyone, and Ifa receives anyone. I've had, people of every faith, everything from Hindu to Muslim to Jewish to atheist, because people are faced with life situations, real life situations, and
There you go.
Just
like that, just like that,
that.
and Ifa doesn't discriminate. Ifa sees all of humanity as a child, because we're all children of God.
Yeah.
We are all children of Olodumare, the Great Spirit. Whether you call him, Allah, whether you call him Jehovah, doesn't matter what you call him. Ifa recognizes that you have different spirituality, different missions in life, and that this may be your tradition, but you all are under his protection.
Yeah.
Okay.
The word of the Creator for all humanity was how it was brought to me. That Ifa is the word of the Creator for all humanity. So it covers us all.
Okay. And anything else you want to bring? You want to just
Well,
discuss
one of-
briefly?
One of the main messages, thank you both very much for the opportunity, to be here and to have this candid conversation, and touching just on a few
Mhm.
aspects of the religion. It really, with the association, with our work with York University, the Harriet Tubman Institute, and the Afro-Latin American Working Group, is to empower all Canadians, no matter what their background is, but especially Canadians which come from an African descent or Latin American descent, which have real spiritual questions.
Mhm.
And to let them know that the Ifa religion and belief system is in Canada, that they should be proud of their religious ancestry, and if they have more questions, to see us or visit us on Facebook, where we publish many articles, scientific, anthropological, religious documents, so that they can become more aware and have more knowledge about the religion in Canada.
What is the Facebook page?
It's actually Asociación Cultural Yoruba de Canadá. If you is listed on our the name of
Okay.
the program under my vice presidency, Asociación Cultural Yoruba de Canadá. If you look at for us, the page has 900 people that are actively engaged. Our group on the internet has over 2,500 people from Canada, United States, and around the world.
Yeah.
And I guess if people have any trouble finding that, they can
Yeah.
just email the email address we have on
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
screen, and you can
Yeah,
point,
and point them in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
All right.
All right, thank
Well,
you.
guys, this has been great.
Interesting, interesting. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
I'm sure we
sharing.
could keep this
Appreciate it.
conversation.
I'm sure we
going
could.
Sure
all
would.
day.
I would have loved to
It's a
see
topic for a
a
lifetime.
session, but that's probably very private, right?
It is very
It is
private,
very
yeah,
private,
very
yeah.
private.
Yeah, maybe
I
next
would like
time.
to see a demonstration with you or something.
Well, I was thinking about one with you. You know what I'm saying? Okay. I guess that's it for the show today. Thanks, guys. It's
All right.
really
Thank you.
awesome. Great
Thank
to
you
meet
very
you,
much.
Jean Jerome.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Great.
And so that's it. We'll see y'all next time right here on liquidlunch, thatchannel.com.